All right, so focus. This is something I think we could all use a little more of these days,
Yeah,
right?
totally. It's like the holy grail in this day and age.
And we're diving into Lucy Joe Palladino's Find Your Focus Zone for this deep dive. And let me tell you, this book does not disappoint. She really gets into it.
Absolutely. I mean, Palladino's a veteran in this
That's
field,
true.
decades researching attention.
Yeah.
And what I really appreciate is she doesn't just, give you the standard try harder advice. She actually breaks down the science of it all, like how our brains are actually wired, which I find fascinating.
Well, and that's key, right? Because if we don't get how this whole focus thing works, how can we expect to, actually improve it?
Exactly. It's like you can't fix a car engine if you don't even know what's under the hood.
Totally. So speaking of under the hood, one of the first things that really jumped out at me in this book is this concept of the inverted U attention curve. Have you ever noticed how, like, sometimes you are just laser focused and other times your brain feels like, I don't know, a million browser tabs open at once?
Oh, 100%, yeah. And that's the curve in action right there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Think of it visually for a second. It's like a big upside down U, right? So
Yeah.
the left side of that U, that's where stimulation is low. You're bored, mind's wandering.
Oh, like when I'm stuck in a meeting, that could have totally been an email and I'm trying to, like, plan my grocery list in my head just to stay awake.
Exactly. And, that's our brain being totally normal. Our brains crave stimulation. So then as that stimulation increases, our focus starts to climb up that left side of the U, heading towards the peak.
Okay, so we're climbing towards the peak, and that peak is...
That's where the magic happens. That's what Palladino calls the focus zone, right? You're in the zone. You know that feeling you get when you're so absorbed in something
Yeah.
that everything else just fades away?
Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
You're in flow.
You're in flow. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really interesting. If the stimulation keeps going up, we don't actually keep getting more focused. We actually start to slide down the other side of the U.
Oh, so too much stimulation is just as bad as not enough?
Exactly. Too much of a good thing.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. So, like, when I've got a million deadlines and my inbox is blowing up and I'm just feeling completely scattered, that's...
That is your brain basically hitting overload.
Eh.
And when that happens, your amygdala, remember, that's the part of our brain that's all about fight or flight. It's like, whoa, too much. Time to shut down.
Oh, no, not the amygdala. See, that explains so much because it does feel like my brain kind of just goes into panic mode, like, danger! Must find something easier to focus on, and suddenly I'm like scrolling through social media for the 100th time that day.
Exactly. That's that amygdala hijack in action.
It's like my brain just chooses the path of least resistance, even when I know it's not what I actually want to be doing. It's so frustrating.
It is. And that's why understanding this curve is so crucial.
Yeah.
Because it's not about, just bullying yourself into focusing harder.
Right.
It's about understanding where you are on that curve at any given moment. And then, having the tools and strategies to adjust that stimulation accordingly.
So it's less about fixing our focus and more about, like, learning how to work with these natural patterns that our brains already have.
Exactly. And that's where Palladino strategies come in. But we'll dive into those right after this quick message.
All right, so we've got this whole attention curve thing going on, the sweet spot we're aiming for.
Right, exactly.
But how do we actually, like, get there? It seems like everyone's got a different productivity hack these days. I mean, where do you even begin?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's got the magic solution.
Right.
And some of them are great, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But Palladino, I think, she gives us a framework that goes beyond just those kind of quick fixes. She gives you a whole toolkit of strategies.
Yeah.
But for clarity's sake, we've kind of distilled it down to 3 core steps.
Okay.
Assessment, temperature control,
Okay.
and sustaining focus.
I love a good roadmap, so tell me more about this assessment step.
Yes. So it all starts with, like, taking a beat to really just understand, like, what's your current state?
Right.
How are you feeling, like, right now in this moment?
Okay.
And Palladino actually uses this really simple scale of 0 to 10.
Okay.
0 being, like, you are totally zen, blissed out. And then 10 is, like, completely wired, overwhelmed.
Gotcha.
So on that scale, where would you say you are right now at this very moment?
Oh, right now, like, maybe a 2.
Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty chill just chatting about this stuff.
See, exactly. We're already doing it.
Okay.
But now let's imagine a different scenario for a second. Imagine you're about to give a big presentation.
Yeah.
Where do you think you'd be on that scale?
Oh, at least an 8. Right. Yeah, my heart would be racing, palms are sweaty.
Exactly. Your body's getting ready for action.
Yeah.
And that's where stepping back comes in, and that's like the second part of assessment, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about creating a little bit of distance between you and whatever's causing that stress response.
Okay, so how do you step back? Like, do I need to physically leave the room when I'm stressed? Because, full disclosure, sometimes I do.
I mean, sometimes you do, and sometimes it is that literal.
Yeah.
But it's really more about like a mental shift in perspective. It's almost like you're watching yourself in a movie,
Oh.
right? You can
Mhm.
see the situation, you can see yourself, you can see your reactions,
Yeah.
but there's that little bit of separation.
Okay, I like that.
Right.
So it's like there I am totally freaking out about this deadline,
Yeah,
but from up here it doesn't seem quite so bad.
exactly. And what that does is it allows that prefrontal cortex,
Mm.
the rational part of our brain,
Mm.
it allows that to come back online. Because remember, when we're all stressed out, that amygdala can hijack our thinking, right?
Totally.
It makes us more reactive, less focused.
Yeah.
So stepping back kind of helps us regain that control.
It's like hitting the pause button on the panic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of getting swept away by all those, fight or flight impulses, you can actually stop, take a breath,
Yeah.
and assess the situation.
Yeah.
And then, once you're thinking more clearly, that's when you can start to unpack the why. Like, why am I reacting this way?
Okay.
And Palladino tells this really interesting story about Chris, who was a college student,
Okay.
and she was really struggling with procrastination.
We've all been there.
Right. But it turned out that it actually stemmed from her experiences with this super strict teacher back in elementary school.
Wow, so even years later, those anxieties were still affecting her focus.
Crazy, right? It just shows how powerful our subconscious can be. But the good news is once we become aware of those patterns, then we can start to work with them instead of against them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we've done our little assessment.
Right.
What's next on this roadmap to better focus?
All right. So step 2 is all about temperature control, right?
Mhm.
And remember that inverted U curve.
Yes.
Sometimes we need to cool down to get back into that focus zone.
Okay.
And sometimes, believe it or not, we need to actually bump up the stimulation a little bit.
Okay, so it's like Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. Our brains like to be just right in the middle.
It's all about finding that just right temperature.
Yes.
And you know what Palladino calls it? The ice pack method.
I love that. So what are some of these like mental ice packs that people are using?
Well, just like you put an ice pack on, like a physical
Mhm.
injury, right? You can use these specific techniques to kind of soothe your mental state when it's overheated.
I love that.
It's very personalized. But a good example Palladino gives is this guy, Tony, who was a real estate developer.
Okay.
And he really struggled with anger, especially when work was stressful, right? High stakes job, lots of pressure,
Yeah.
and his go-to ice pack,
Yeah, what was it?
hitting the golf course.
Golf. Seriously.
Yeah,
That doesn't sound very calming, to be honest.
I know, right? You'd think it'd be the opposite.
Right.
But for Tony, it was the perfect way to de-stress.
Interesting.
It wasn't even really about the golf itself, but it was about disconnecting from work,
Right.
engaging in something he actually enjoyed,
Yeah.
and then he could come back to whatever he needed to do in a much calmer, more focused state.
Oh, his family probably appreciated that ice pack too, I'm sure.
I'm sure they did.
Happy wife, happy life, or whatever they say.
Exactly. And the key here is that what works for Tony might not work for you or for me.
Right.
It's about finding what works for your brain and your body.
So golf for some, maybe a bubble bath and a good book for others.
Exactly.
What about when we need to heat up our focus?
Okay, so that's where the power outage technique comes in.
Okay.
And I know it sounds a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we actually need more stimulation, not less,
Yeah.
to get into that focus zone.
Okay. This is blowing my mind a little bit.
I know. It's like jump-starting a car battery,
Okay, all right, I'm listening, but this sounds like the complete opposite of everything we've talked about.
I know.
This is how we get distracted, right?
It can be, but it's about strategic stimulation. Okay.
Right.
Not just adding more chaos to the mix.
Okay. Okay.
Palladino. She talks about this computer programmer, Dolly.
Okay.
Brilliant guy. But he was constantly getting distracted.
Okay.
And they finally figured out he was actually chronically understimulated.
So his brain was like, must find something more interesting.
Exactly. He was craving novelty, engagement.
Yeah.
So they actually helped him create a system of structured breaks for stimulating activities. Things that he actually enjoyed,
Okay.
but that he would normally get sucked into for hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it would totally derail his work.
So it's like setting boundaries, even for the things you enjoy.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The key was these breaks were time boxed.
Oh, okay.
So he knew he had a set amount of time to indulge, and then it was back to work.
Yeah.
And what he found was that these planned breaks actually made him more focused overall.
That's amazing. It's like you're giving yourself permission to have those little breaks, those little indulgences.
Right, but on your terms.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and it just makes me think about how we view focus in general, right?
Yeah.
We treat it like this on-off switch.
Right.
Like we should just be able to be on all the time.
Yeah, just flip the switch.
Exactly, and our brains just don't work that way.
Right.
We need those ebbs and flows, those moments of stimulation, those moments of rest.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
And being able to, I guess, listen to your body, listen to your own rhythms, and what you need in that moment.
100%.
Which I guess brings us to the final and maybe the most crucial part of all of this, sustaining focus.
Yes, because it's one thing to have a moment of focus, but how do we actually make it last?
Right, right.
How do we cultivate that deep, sustained attention that allows us to actually really engage with our work, with our lives, with the things that matter?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And something I think we could all use a little help with, especially in this world of endless distractions. Sustained attention.
It sounds kind of intent, right? Like almost, I don't know, intimidating.
Yeah, it sounds like something you need, like a personal trainer for,
Yeah.
but for your brain.
Yes. Exactly.
Right. But it's not about like pushing ourselves to the limit or anything. It's
Right.
really more about, you think about it like building a muscle.
Okay.
We're not talking about becoming, laser-focused robots here,
Right.
but developing the stamina to really engage with the things that matter to us.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So it's more about having the mental energy to stay present, whether we're, tackling a big work project or having a meaningful conversation, or even just like enjoying a quiet moment without getting pulled away by every little notification and distraction. 100%. Yeah.
So how do we actually build that kind of stamina?
Well, the good news is it's something that we can cultivate over time.
Okay.
Like any skill, really. Think about musicians, athletes, anyone who has mastered like a really complex skill.
Right.
They didn't get there overnight.
Yeah.
It took consistent, dedicated practice.
So it's less about like having this innate ability to focus and more about just, putting in the work, like anything else we want to get good at in life.
Exactly. And the really cool thing is that this practice literally changes our brains.
Really?
Yeah. It strengthens those neural pathways. It makes those actions and thought patterns more automatic.
Okay, so the more we practice focusing, the easier it actually becomes to focus.
Exactly.
It's like,
Yeah.
building muscle memory, but for our attention.
I love that. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And Palladino actually talks about this technique called mental rehearsal
Mm-hmm.
that can be really, really helpful for this. And she gives this example of a tennis player, and he kept making this same crucial error during his matches.
Okay, yeah.
And it was really frustrating.
So like visualizing yourself succeeding even before you actually do the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what this player would do is he'd actually mentally rehearse the entire game, and he would include that error, but each time he would visualize himself correcting it, making the right shot.
Interesting. So he's literally rewiring his brain through practice,
Exactly.
both physical and mental.
Yes.
Wow. That's so cool.
It's like training your brain to respond differently under pressure.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. And that applies to anything we want to master, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's playing an instrument, writing a book, giving a presentation.
Or even, just navigating our day-to-day
Right.
without, losing our cool.
Right.
That makes me think about something I've been trying to be more mindful of, which is just being more present when I'm with my friends and family, Putting the phone down, not scrolling, just actually being there in the moment.
Absolutely. I think that's a big one for a lot of us.
It is.
Yeah. So how do you think you could use mental rehearsal to help with that?
Well, I guess I could try, like, picturing myself, in a specific scenario. Like, let's say I'm having dinner with friends
Okay.
and, my phone buzzes with a notification. But instead of instantly, like I usually do, reaching for it, I picture myself just taking a breath, consciously choosing to stay present in that conversation.
Yes. And, the more you practice that mental rehearsal, that neural pathway, it gets stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
And it becomes easier to make that choice in real time.
It's like giving myself a little mental script to follow
Exactly.
before I even encounter the temptation.
Exactly.
I love that.
And that's actually where desire comes in, right?
Okay.
Because it is so much easier to cultivate that sustained attention when we're deeply engaged, when we want to be focusing on the task at hand.
Oh, that is so true.
Yeah.
Like when I'm working on a project that I'm really passionate about, I can get lost in it for hours.
Exactly.
But if it's something that I'm dreading, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
good luck to me.
Right. Forget about it.
Like my brain is going in a million directions.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Palladino stresses how important it is to align our actions with our values,
Right.
with our deepest desires.
Yeah.
And she talked about this thought experiment that I think is really interesting.
Okay.
It's called the deathbed test.
Oh, okay.
Sounds a little morbid, but
Intense, but okay. I'm intrigued.
it's about getting real with ourselves.
Okay.
It's like, imagine yourself at the end of your life,
Okay.
looking back.
Yeah.
Are you going to regret the time you spent on things that didn't really matter? Would you wish you'd been more present, more focused on the things that brought you joy, that brought you fulfillment?
Wow. Right?
That's a powerful question.
It is. It's a really good gut check.
Yeah.
And it can be so helpful for like reevaluating our priorities.
Our daily actions actually lining up with what we really value. Reminds me of that Steve Jobs quote.
What's that?
Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life.
So good.
I
So
don't
it's
know.
about, first figuring out what really matters to us
Yes,
and then using that knowledge to fuel our focus.
exactly. When we're clear on the why, the how becomes so much easier.
This has been so eye-opening. We went from the mechanics of how our attention actually works to how our own personal values and motivations really play a role.
It's all connected.
So much good stuff to think about.
It is, and we've just scratched the surface of what Palladino covers in this book, so.
I know. There's always more to learn, but for our listeners who are like, ready to put some of this into practice today, what's like one small step they could take?
I would say think about your own focus zone. When do you feel most engaged, most productive? What are those things you can do to create more of those moments in your day?
Yes. And don't forget about those tools we talked about, stepping back, temperature control, mental rehearsal, such good stuff.
Absolutely. It's about taking control of our focus instead of letting it control us.
Yes. Love that. All right. Until next time, everyone, happy focusing.